Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rachel Frederick. Everyone in this room is going to die. Now that I have your attention, how many of you have a legal will? Not many, I'll bet, because according to a study by Harris Interactive in 2009, only 35% of all Americans had a legal will. And Harris Interactive also predicted that that number would decline per the economy. Consider, if you will, the possibility that tomorrow you suddenly die without a will. I see before me a relatively young audience, and therefore it's logical to conclude that your spouse will likely remarry if you die. If he or she died the day after the wedding, then everything you entrusted your spouse with, everything you inherited, and everything you want your children to have could end up in the hands of a complete stranger who is morally entitled to very little, but by hook or by crook can legally get everything. We all know that youth is no guarantee of long life, and I'm sure that each one of us in this room knows somebody in the community, among our family or friends, who was widowed young. According to EasyNarticles.com and the U.S. Census Bureau, there were between 554,000 widows and widowers between the ages of 18 and 44 in 2004-2005 alone. Among that number was my own father. My mother also died without leaving a will. Therefore, her personal items, bank accounts, inherited properties, etc., even family heirlooms, were legally left in the hands of my father. Because my mother left no legal provisions, these things were my father's to do with as he saw fit. Now, because his kids were relatively young, and my father safeguarded most of my mother's possessions, her valuables, her jewelry, her inherited properties, and he collected rent on these properties in our name and safeguarded them for us in the future. Now, my father, he didn't need my mother's money. He was well off. He retired from a successful company. He had his own savings, and he also had his own inherited properties. Now, my father was also still relatively young, and 2 years later, he remarried. My stepmother was a widow with a large estate, plenty of her own money, and multiple times my father had talked about what he would like for us kids to have, both in front of her and privately. And because my father probably reasoned that he was young, healthy, and that his new bride was aware of his wishes, he probably didn't think he had a whole lot to worry about. So time goes on, and my father sold both my mother's and his inherited properties and reinvested them in a business. 2 years later, my father had a massive heart attack and died. No will. Now, because my father made no legal provisions, half of everything that my mother and father and both sets of my grandparents had worked so hard for and saved were in the hands of a woman who had known my father for less than 2 years. She did not abide by my father's wishes. She did not have to. She buried my father in a cheap coffin, sold his and my mother's personal effects at auction and yard sales, and moved out of state. Now, my stepmother managed to get away with this because in most states, any inherited property, be it guns, jewelry, furniture, anything that you can imagine, that is sold, traded, or otherwise converted, automatically becomes marital property. According to Forbes magazine, community states required that all property of the marital community be divided equally, including family-owned businesses. In most states, the law recognizes that a decedent's children are entitled to some portion of his or her estate, even without a will. However, in the intimacy of marriage, as I'm sure many of you will attest, it often becomes difficult to differentiate between one's personal property and one's marital property. And many states use this distinction to decide how much the surviving spouse gets. Currently, 9 states recognize community property, Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. And according to encyclopedia.com, such a decree means that all property or income acquired by either spouse during marriage is considered equally owned by both spouses for purpose of the division of property upon death or divorce, or for purposes of business transacted by either spouse. Now you're probably thinking that because we live here in northern Missouri, this wouldn't apply to you. However, 11 other states have also adopted the Uniform Disposition of Community Property Rights at Death Act, an act which, according to findlaw.com, protects couples that move from a community property state into one where community property is not recognized from drastic changes in the character and disposition of their property upon the death of a spouse. So what this means to those of you in Missouri is that even if your spouse got married in Las Vegas, Arizona, California, or any of the other common law states and moved here to Northeast Missouri and died, the laws of that community state would apply. And his or her new spouse would immediately receive 1/2 of everything they owned. Now this half can be substantial when you consider that this half includes everything that you both worked hard for, everything that you wanted your children to have, and if converted in any way, half of everything you both inherit. Now, do you really want a stranger to inherit half of everything that you own by virtue of a wedding ring? What of your family Bible? Your grandma's silver? Grandpa's rifle? While most states do attempt to protect a decedent's personal property, such as family Bibles, photos, accounts, etc., from disposal by those not entitled to it, this is difficult because without a will, it is easy to clean out bank accounts because many spouses know each other's PIN numbers. I'm sure you all, I do. And it's difficult to prove that the decedent either owned certain things and that he was in possession of them at the time of death. It is also incredibly easy to sell such items privately. Public auctions, despite circulated bills, they typically reserve photographs for high-dollar merchandise, and they describe lesser items too vaguely, such as an old chair, old Bible, etc., to prove identifying characteristics. Yard sales, Craigslist, personals, etc., they don't even offer these minimum safeguards because you neither know the buyer, you don't know what was being sold, and you don't even know that it's being sold. Despite contrary belief, drafting the last will and testament is neither difficult nor expensive. According to the American Association of Retired Persons, or the AARP, the average will produced by a lawyer is between $100 and $1,000. This is depending on complexity, but you can also buy a do-it-yourself kit from Walmart, libraries, bookstores, or many other retail stores at a cost of as little as $5. Now, there's very few of us that cannot afford that. It is human nature to reject the fact that we are all going to die. That everyone we love, everyone we know, everyone we see on TV, everyone in this room is going to die. It is also the nature of any good marriage to trust your spouse explicitly. However, as I've shown you in my father's story, thinking you always have another day, trusting a newcomer with your children's inheritance, and trusting someone with generations of your family's heirlooms is risky, to say the least. Because the law is cold, unemotionless, and does not weigh merit when it comes to sorting out who gets what when we do not. It is also unnecessary because a will is inexpensive and can protect our most valuable possessions, our children, from the compounded grief of our deaths and a costly and often ineffective legal litigation, which can also involve years of legal fees, loss of work,